My name is Susan Scott Jagalko, and it is my privilege to serve as your worship associate today. Our minister, the Reverend Kent Doss, is not in the pulpit this morning, but returns next Sunday. Today, we are pleased to have the Reverend Jonipher Kwong, whom I remember speaking at Tapestry quite a few years ago, and happy to see him again. Reverend Jonipher was born in and raised in the Philippines. He's of Chinese descent and has spent most of his adult life in California and Hawaii. He values his pluralistic, ecumenical upbringing, including United Methodist, Episcopalian, Calvary Church, Chinese Mennonite, and the Honolulu Mindfulness Community, a Sangha influenced by Zen Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. He graduated from the University of California in Santa Barbara with film studies and obtained his Master's of Divinity and Doctor of Ministry from Claremont School of Theology. He recently served as the minister of the First Unitarian Church of Honolulu, where former President, Barack Obama attended Sunday school as a child. Currently, Reverend Jonipher is the Congregational Life Staff member for the Pacific Western region of the Unitarian Universalist Association and a program leader for the College of Social Justice. He resides in San Pedro with his husband of 18 years and their 10-year-old cat. Reverend Jonipher is the primary point of contact for our wider denomination. He can act as a consultant and help connect with us with resources from the regional and national level. Following the service, he will be available for a short question and answer session if you want to have more information about Tapestry's connection to our denominational services. This Sunday, we are focusing on the word sanctuary. Think about what that word means to you, to us: a safe haven, a harbor, refuge, comfort, relief, sacred. I think of a place to feel secure, to reflect, to contemplate. I also define sanctuary as not only an actual space like this building, but a feeling, even an action like a hand clasp or hug. Like ages ago when my husband was a Navy lieutenant and he called me from San Francisco to tell me he had safely arrived back in the United States from Vietnam. I cherish that feeling of relief for his safety and me turning to my mother and sister and saying through tears, "He's safe now," and being encircled in their hugs and love. So this circle, this community, this spiritual home, provides a sanctuary. My husband reminded me of poet Robert Frost's line, "Home is where when you go there, they have to take you in." Would we? Would I? Would we completely, wholly? Have you ever depended on the kindness of strangers? Has someone asked the impactful, comforting words, "How can I help?" Our sanctuary is a home where we strive to hold each other in respect and trust, and to be our authentic selves. We welcome you without regard to race, creed, immigration status, gender expression, a sanctuary of inclusion. Welcome to Tapestry, a Unitarian Universalist congregation of our Unitarian Universalist heritage. Each morning, we must hold out the chalice of our being to receive, to carry, and to give back. May we know once again, we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to the community, and to each other.
Welcome to this space, this sanctuary of peace where we come to not only create our best selves, but to also do the work of creating a beloved community. We come together today as individuals, much like individual pieces of glass or pottery that are different shapes and sizes and colors, all of which are broken with imperfect, jagged edges, but always beautiful. While our pieces may not always fit neatly together, it is within the sanctuary, guided by our principles, that we gather together to create a beautiful mosaic. May the brokenness and beauty you find in one another create peace in this space and fill our hearts with love as we create worship together. I invite us now to listen to that voice, still and small, that is within us. That voice which calls us to silence. That voice which calls us to our inner sanctuary. If it would be helpful for you to lessen the distraction, I invite you to close your eyes. If it would be helpful for you to feel your connection to the earth, I invite you to plant both feet firmly on the ground, feeling the vibration of the love that holds us all. And during this time when we are connected to our sacred breath, I invite you to hear this prayer called the Shantideva prayer by Shantideva, who was an 8th century Indian Buddhist monk. May I become at all times, both now and forever, a protector of those without protection, a guide for those who have lost their way, a ship for those with oceans to cross, a bridge for those with rivers to cross, a sanctuary for those in danger, a lamp for those without light, a place of refuge for those who lack shelter, and a servant to all in need. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. As we continue to pay attention to that still small voice, as we continue to breathe in and out, may our hearts be filled with loving kindness. May our minds be filled with compassionate thoughts. I invite us into a moment of silent reflection. I know for the past month, you've been talking a lot about the concept of liberation. Liberation from institutionalized racism, or liberation from the cult of individuality, or even liberation from technology. And I bet many of you, when you heard that sermon, went through some sort of withdrawal afterwards, right? And last week, liberation theology itself. Today, we're going to talk about something even more controversial, especially in the UU world, and that is liberating our definitions without having to put together a committee to wordsmith it. Are you ready for this? Yeah, I know, right? Ooh, that's dangerous territory here. Well, our word for today is sanctuary. Over the years, we Unitarian Universalists have struggled with the definition of sanctuary. Our forebears, our spiritual forebears, the Jews, paid a lot of attention, for example, to how the temple in Jerusalem was to be built. Because after all, the Holy of Holies is where the divine, where Adonai, where God resided. And therein, contained within the Holy of Holies, is something called the Ark of the Covenant, a physical representation of the divine presence. And when this ark got lost, all of a sudden, this represented the turmoil that the Jewish people went through and the full fact that many Jewish people then went into diaspora. Thankfully, Indiana Jones found it in the 1980s so that life could go on again. Now, Jesus twisted this concept a little bit of sanctuary when he did a meetup.com with the Samaritan woman by the well. I don't know how many of you have heard of this story, but it's been said that, well, Jesus said anyway, that God doesn't just reside in that temple over there in Jerusalem that you're not allowed to set foot in anyway because you're a Samaritan woman. But rather, he says, wherever truth is and wherever love is, that's where the divine presence is. Now, we Unitarian Universalists these days have certainly built many beautiful sanctuaries over the years. I don't know how many of you have been to Boston to visit some of these beautiful sanctuaries that the UUs have built, right? And more recently, we even tried to make sure that these are green sanctuaries. I noticed that you have a green sanctuary name tag over here. Or sanctuaries that are so mission-oriented, their sole purpose is to counter oppressive immigration policies. So we've established, like the First Unitarian Church or the First Unitarian Society of Denver, for example, has provided an actual sanctuary to an undocumented immigrant named Jeanette Viscara and her 4 kids. If you haven't heard this story before, it was covered by CNN and other fake news outlets out there. So I invite you to go check them out. And however, I feel like as well-intentioned and as good and laudable these efforts are, sometimes they're mostly symbolic because as we know, ICE could still go in there at any time and tear that family apart. And there's no way that even if you combine all the churches that have provided a physical sanctuary for all these undocumented immigrants in this country, that we would even cover the number of undocumented immigrants that need a sanctuary. But it is, however, a step in the right direction, in my opinion, and it's a way for us to show that we don't exist as religious communities simply to draw together, quote-unquote, like-minded liberals into our own little country clubs, right? Can I get an amen to that? And then, of course, we got to show compassion to those who still operate like a country club, because I sometimes wonder how even the most atheists of our congregations who don't necessarily believe that God dwells in the building called the sanctuary can place such a high value on physical edifices like a church building. I know it's hard to believe, but sometimes these congregations would rather cut program money or staff hours in order to preserve and keep the buildings that they occupy. I'm not going to name names, but believe it or not, these congregations actually suffer from a symptom and a malady that I have begun to call an edifice complex. My siblings in faith, I have great news for you. I want you to be healed from the edifice complex. I want to talk to you today about liberating yourself from that prognosis. I know perhaps there's been some anxiety in this congregation with the news of the recent move or the upcoming move, I should say, that Lynn has worked so hard to make sure that you all are kept abreast of, and she tried to be as transparent about it as possible, and even setting up private tours of your new building, right? So there might be some anxiety around that because some of you have probably grown to love this place and many of the rituals that have taken place here, including weddings and memorial services. So fear not, sanctuary can be redefined. So I'm going to propose a working definition for you here this morning. What if sanctuary is defined as a safe and sacred space for those who are weary? That sanctuary is a spiritual home to resistors of oppression, a place where love thrives despite a challenging environment where deplorables rule the world. And it seems like these days it's a rotating deplorable cabinet, right? I can't even keep track anymore. How could we make that definition of sanctuary come alive? Well, this morning I have 3 examples for you to play with. The first one is the example of a place called Boston Sanctuary. And so the song that you heard played this morning during the prelude was actually, and a song that I believe they're going to be singing during the offertory, right? The trio is going to be singing that. Is called, that song is called Sanctuary. So the lyrics go, make us aware that we are a sanctuary, each made holy and love right through. And with thanksgiving, make us a living sanctuary anew. Don't worry, I won't sing it for you because they'll do a much better job of doing that later on. But this is where that song comes from. And if you haven't heard of Boston Sanctuary, they're called a vibrant worship and real connection for seekers of all kinds. And this is what it says on their website about who they are. They say by vibrant worship, they mean worship that's heart-centered, spirit-filled, down to earth, and wicked smart. Connection that encourages us to respond more fully to the call of love. We worship to reconnect to the sacred, experience the wonder of our interbeing, and encounter and grow in a love beyond our knowing. We envision a growing community of connection where we walk with and care for one another in hard times and in celebrations, encourage one another to spiritual growth, and work together for transformative social change that reflects our progressive values. We hope to reconnect to the sanctuaries that we each are, and together create a safe, sacred, and life-giving community, a sanctuary to all who hunger for such a spiritual home. The sanctuary welcomes people of all beliefs, ages, abilities, classes, cultures, races, and ethnicities, sexual orientations, and gender identities and expressions. Bring your whole self. Isn't that a lovely definition of sanctuary? And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could somehow replicate this, you know? So those of you who don't know, this group, Boston Sanctuary, is actually a group that's sponsored by 2 brick and mortar congregations because they have decided that there's a need to provide such a sanctuary in a place like Boston. What if one were to be figured out here in the West Coast? That's my greatest fantasy, is to just not have a place that's wicked smart, right? That's a very Massachusetts, New England, Bostonian way to look at it. But what if it were hella cool, like totally gnarly, and awesome, dude? What would that sanctuary look like out here in the West Coast? Well, I thought a lot about it, and I did some research, and I tried to explore places where these emerging communities are taking root and springing up. And I found out that there's such an experimental group right in my own backyard. I live in San Pedro, California, and one would think that it's a sleepy community. Nothing ever comes out of San Pedro, right? More things come out of the city across the bridge called Long Beach than it does in San Pedro. But a couple of years ago, I found out that there was a visionary minister who thought that she could turn an empty plot of land into a sanctuary. And so she rented this space. It was just a vacant lot. And she decided to put some compost in there and put some usable soil in there, and then started planting some seeds called Swiss chards she started out with. And then it grew to become planting broccoli and onions and other fruits and vegetables and flowers in this garden. And she decided that worship shouldn't just be an hour each Sunday. So worship actually got extended to 3 hours. But this isn't like the kind of worship that the Baptist has where the preacher goes on and on and on for 2 or 3 hours, right? But rather, the first hour of worship actually involved tending to the garden, watering it, harvesting the crops that they have been able to grow in the garden. And then they have worship from 4 to 5. And this is basically church in a box. So every element is brought into the garden every week, and they have worship right then and there. Rain or shine, they have worship out in this garden. And then from 5 to 6, they have what's known as a community dinner, where everybody shares from their food. And sometimes the salads or whatnot are grown from the garden and harvested from there as well. No matter what people have to bring, or sometimes they even bring in people who are temporarily houseless, who to participate in the joint dinner celebration together. So that's their idea of worship, that it's a more well-rounded way of being together. And the whole slogan for the Garden Church, as it's called, is that people are there to feed and to be fed. To feed and to be fed. And the whole idea, again, is that there is enough for everyone. And that's, in fact, one of the songs that they usually sing every Sunday. And in addition to that, realizing that worship doesn't just take place one day a week, but theological discussions and the ways in which they grow their spiritual lives ought to take place every day of the week. So on Thursdays, right after the farmers market in San Pedro, they have what's called Theological Thursdays. And instead of, however, discussing theology in an RE classroom or in a closed environment, they meet at a place called Whale and Ale. Because as we know, theological discussions go much deeper when you're sipping a cup of beer, right? So anyway, I only went to one discussion and I found it fascinating. But to be honest with you, I have found in this place, to my surprise, a place of refuge, especially after the Orlando shooting last year. I don't know if you all recall that or not, but whenever I needed to find a sanctuary, I was able to find it in this congregation, which, as it may sound, you may think to yourself, wow, that sounds like such a UU congregation, doesn't it? In fact, the minister, when she was recording her video, was talking about how she was doing this because we're all part of the interdependent web of life, and I'm going to her sister, you know, you need to come out as a Unitarian Universalist already. Quit being in the closet about it. But this is actually a Swedenborgian congregation. How many of you have heard of this tradition? Only a couple of you. Ever heard of Johnny Appleseed? Ever heard of a woman by the name of Helen Keller? Very prominent Swedenborgians, believe it or not. So they're part of the progressive church movement. And so that's the second example. The third example actually happened very recently when I was involved. For a very brief period of time, I experimented with giving ride shares. And I'm not gonna tell you the name of the company that I work for, but a hint is that it's not the one whose CEO recently resigned amidst several controversies, all right? But what I found is that I could actually never take my hat off as a minister, no matter where I go. That each and every single ride experience turned into a pastoral care and counseling session, whether I recognize it or not. For example, I've had people, including this one woman that I gave a ride to here in Orange County, who was in her 30s, her early 30s, who was sharing with me that her husband just died a year ago. And as if that wasn't tragic enough to have a young husband die, right, or a young partner die at that age, but he died because he committed suicide. And she was going through such grief because I can't even imagine what it feels like to find your husband dead on your bedroom floor, you know, and didn't even leave a suicide note or anything like that. But apparently he had been struggling with substance abuse, and she had nowhere else to turn with her grief except her congregation, her church. And she was being very apologetic in terms of, I know that this is a small size congregation because she actually grew up in a mega church here in Orange County. And she was saying that The small congregation only had, and I was waiting for it to find out how small that congregation really was. She said, "We only have 200 members." And I'm like, "Girl, that is small. Might as well be a small group ministry. What are you talking about?" But anyway, but she was saying that in this small congregation, however, she found a place where people gathered together to bring her casseroles and to cook for her and to shower their love upon her. And that was the reason why she was never going to leave that church ever, because that group of people cared for her in that deep way. And I thought to myself, what a great vision for what a sanctuary could be. And then I think of another instance where I gave a ride to this young man who recently came out to his very conservative Catholic family. And it took every ounce of energy and every ounce of self-restraint for me to not give away my card, because I wasn't supposed to do that, right? But I thought to myself, if only you knew more about Unitarian Universalism. It all has to do with a relentless pursuit of a mission to transform the world. Here's the thing, we can't afford to do church as usual anymore. We need living and liberating sanctuaries these days that are called out to the world we live in, not expecting people to come to us because of our clever sales pitch or what have you. To be a liberating sanctuary today means banding together with our interfaith partners, building bridges of understanding and collaboration that may even lead to sharing space together in some creative way. To be a liberating sanctuary means not attaching ourselves to a specific space or place, but to carve out brave spaces wherever we are, becoming Unitarian Universalists 24/7, even when we're sharing a ride with perfect strangers. To be a liberating sanctuary means thinking beyond either or, as Leslie Takahashi's reading pointed out, and finding the both and in the center and in the margins, connecting the dots, finding places of intersectionality in a world that wants to divide us. Perhaps the big JC was onto something all along when he says that divine presence can be felt wherever truth is told, wherever the spirit of life is alive and well, wherever two or more are gathered in the name of love. It is time we liberate the meaning of sanctuary and become a liberating sanctuary ourselves. As you physically move from this location, may you realize that wherever you go, there your sanctuary be, and there your mission will continue to be fulfilled. And may you realize, going forth from here today, that we haven't just been to church, we are the church. Can I get an amen to that? Amen. May it be so.